Good evening, I'm Anthony Robart. This is Crime Beat, the stories behind some of Canada's most high-profile homicides, told by the reporters who walk the beat every day. Tonight, families brought together under the most horrible circumstances. Teenage sisters, Marsha and Tamara Ottey, a transit worker, called in to cover a colleague's shift, and the investigator who helped make the connection. And now, here's Crime Beat reporter Caryn Lieberman with If Anything Happens to Me.
Marsha literally ran at 7 months. Not walk, ran. And that should have been a sign to me that she wanted to be an athlete, or she could be an athlete. She was so strong.
Marsha was Avis's firstborn. She was laid back, quiet.
She would talk to me one-on-one. Not about boys, more about sports and school, and she was very sensitive. I remember when she shared her love for track.
Marsha loved the speed, feeling the breeze against her face. By the time Marsha was a teenager, she joined a track club, and teammates were talking. She was good.
I watched her at York one day, and you know what was funny about that day? Marsha was about to start the relay without her baton. It was hilarious. So, you know, just the nerves kicked in.
Marsha had winning in her blood, a cousin who was an Olympic track star in Jamaica.
And she did receive her scholarship at Arkansas State University. And she was just, you know, days to pursuing that. We were planning to leave for Arkansas State the Friday morning.
It was the summer of 1995. Marsha was 19 years old, fresh out of high school, and ready to get out on her own.
Oh my God, was she excited.
How did she feel about leaving her sister behind?
That was not a problem, believe you me. There were siblings. I wouldn't say they fought, fist fight, they fought in words. Actually, Tammy was excited. She was saying more space in the house.
Marsha's sister Tamara, Tammy as everyone called her, was 16 at the time.
Oh my God, Tammy, what a bubbly girl, just full of life, and that's what's painful. She was so full of life. Tammy was a French immersion student, brilliant, A+. Marsha would have to study for days and days to get her good marks. Tammy, she studied, it came a lot easier. She was an A+ student, and she loved her sports. She loved her bag of chips. As she got older, she would crumble her bag of chips so small, so it would last her longer. She loved Marsh. She loved Marsha so much. We were looking forward to going down to watch meets. I can't even imagine being in the stand and seeing Marsha run, you know.
You were so proud of her.
Oh my God, I was. And that's something that bothered me, because that I didn't pick up the clues, because when I would meet a colleague and I would share that Marsha had won this $80,000 American dollars scholarship to Arkansas State, after I went back to the car, Marsha would say, "Why are you telling this to the world?" And I didn't understand at that time. She just did not want the word to get out to the ex that she was leaving, because he wanted her in Toronto.
So it was August,
August 16th.
and you were at work?
I was at work.
Can you bring me back to that day?
I was at work, and I tried to call Marsha that day. There was a heavy, deep beep when I called home, and I just said, wow, Marsha is on the phone, and she has somebody else on hold. That's what I thought. And I called her a second time and a third time. Nothing, and I just thought. So I went home, took the bus home, but I'm thinking, it's still summer, it's light out, it's hot. I'm gonna go home and do a load of laundry. I'm actually rehearsing my evening. Oh, what a mistake. And I got home happy. just happy. I get to the pathway, I can see my house. The door, as I got closer, the door was slightly ajar. And that's not unusual because when we see each other near the home, we'd open the door, courtesy. I pushed the door open and something alarmed me, and my furniture in my living room was all moved around, things in a disarray. And so I just sort of looked around and I ran upstairs. I ran into my bedroom and my underwear drawers pulled out, underwear thrown on top. And the first thing I began thinking was, someone tried to rob me. I was on my way downstairs to the basement, and I hadn't passed the first landing. I could see Marsha downstairs, and I just stopped short right there. I couldn't go down. I couldn't move. I was just frozen.
When you froze and you saw Marsha, did you know Tammy was down there?
No.
One of the girls had left to go to work, and shortly thereafter, witnesses saw her coming back to the door, and she was with a young black man who was described at the time as about 19 years old, sort of 5'7", 145 pounds. And that was the last anybody had heard or seen from the girls until Avis got home late that afternoon. They both had their throats slashed, and they had been stabbed multiple times. That was probably the highest profile case in the city of Toronto.
Dave Perry was a homicide detective at the time. He still has the newspaper clippings all these years later.
Initially, they thought that just because of the amount of violence and the amount of control that would have been necessary to hold the two girls and to do what actually happened to the two girls, that there was probably more than one person. The other thing that was obvious is that there was no signs of forced entry, although there was what we describe as a staged crime scene. Whoever had committed this crime had tried to stage the crime scene to make it look like it was a break and enter, a robbery gone bad, which again gives you an indication that it's probably somebody that's well known to the family or to the two girls. And in one of the girls, in her instance, she'd been stabbed so many times right through the heart. So again, a crime of passion, somebody that's very angry. That was a theory right from the beginning.
Do you remember learning that Tammy was there too?
I asked a neighbor to go down to see if he could help Marsha, give her CPR, she needs help, something isn't right. When my neighbor returned, he said to me, there are two of them down there. And it was only after I met with the homicide detectives and they asked their questions. They didn't show their hand. They would say, what was Tammy wearing today? What was Marsha wearing when you saw her? What was Tammy wearing? Do you have a picture of Tammy? It was so unbelievable. So that's how I found out. And from there, my life changed totally.
Coming up, a memory suddenly returns to Avis. Something Marsha told her shortly before her death. Tonight, Avis Audie is devastated after the discovery of her two teenage daughters, Marsha and Tammy, stabbed to death in her own basement. Now she grapples with a startling realization. Had Marsha been trying to warn her? We return to Caryn Lieberman with If Anything Happens to Me.
One day, actually Marsha was packing, so it had to be 2 weeks the most before she passed. I was at her room door and I just looked in. We were on the same floor, and she looked at me right eye to eye and she said, if anything should happen to me, it's Rohan. And I just looked at her And in that split second following, something distracted us. Could have been a phone ringing, could have been someone at the door. And the only time I remembered what she had said to me was when I saw her in my basement, dead.
The memory came back to Avis when she met with Detective Mark Mendelson. He was one of the lead investigators initially assigned to the case.
History still tells us that the majority of people that are murdered knew their killers, and that's the premise where we're starting from. So we're starting from their friends, getting information from their friends, from their boyfriends, from their ex-boyfriends.
He had one Christmas dinner at my dining room table. This is a person I've driven home when he was at my house too late, in the earliest stages of the friendship. But I was naive. As I said, he was so sweet. He would come in the door, "Hi, Miss Audie, how are you?" Just a soft, sweet smile. But under that, dangerous.
Marsha met Rohan Ranger around grade 7 at an after-school program. They were the same age and wound up going to high school together. Their friendship soon turned into something more. They were dating until Marsha broke it off just 9 months before her death.
I stated once that once Marsha met Rohan, she was dead. I believe that she could not escape. For whatever reason, he latched onto her. She could not escape. And in all fairness, I believe she loved him too.
He was that jilted ex-boyfriend, jealous, was known to carry a firearm, was known to carry a machete, had threatened friends of hers at school. So as she was heading out for her scholarship, that was the deep secret she was trying to keep. She wanted to get out of Toronto before Rohan Ranger found out that she was leaving.
So why wasn't he arrested?
He had a completely destroyed alibi, but there was no forensic evidence whatsoever to link him to the crime scene, which is pretty incredible.
We have a suspect in mind, and we're certainly focusing our direction towards that person. Someone took the time and made the effort to make themselves aware of the comings and goings of the people in the house. So yes, planning was certainly an element of this homicide.
Is it my understanding that Rohan came to the funeral?
I did not see him, but I heard the officer said he was there. He was one of the last to enter the funeral, the church, because they were watching. They were on the surveillance. Yeah. I was out of my house for like 6 weeks, so it took me a long time to think straight.
And so that was August, September, October. Now in October, there's a murder. Are you sort of aware that there's this headline that this TTC collector had been murdered?
Totally aware.
Another murder, yes. A day I'll certainly never forget. It was October 23rd, 1995.
Up next, another brutal stabbing rocks the city. But what will it take for investigators to connect the dots? Before Marsha and Tammy Ottey were murdered, Marsha warned their mother about an ex-boyfriend. So far, police haven't come up with any evidence linking him to the crime. But the murder of a Toronto transit worker is about to provide a critical clue. Now back to Caryn Lieberman with If Anything Happens to Me.
Security camera video shows a bound Dimitrija Trajceski being led back into the transit kiosk at knife point.
Dimitrija Jimmy Trajceski was a 54-year-old ticket booth collector working the night shift.
He had closed up the kiosk at the Victoria Park subway station. I believe he was on his way home. The suspect approached him, and he was brought back into the station and at that time the robbery proceeded. It was sometime during the robbery or thereafter that he met with his death.
I got the call as usual back in those days about 3:30 in the morning, and it was my partner Chris, and he told me I had to get ready quick and get to the Victoria Park subway station, that there had been a TTC collector murdered.
It all happened at 2:30 this morning at the Victoria Park subway station in Scarborough. Trajceski was found by another employee. He was rushed to hospital but was pronounced dead on arrival.
When we got there, we knew that Jimmy had just closed up for the night, so he'd left his booth. All of that was on video. He'd locked up and left in his normal way. His car was the only car in the parking lot at the time. And shortly after Mr. Trajceski had left, the next thing we see on video is he's being brought back into the subway station, back to his booth. It appears that he's got his hands bound behind his back. And the person that is with him, if you could see it very clearly on the video, he's holding a large knife at his back, and he's, restraining him and taking him. Mr. Trajceski's being completely cooperative and compliant. He's not resisting in any way, which, as I come to learn, it was his nature. He was just this sweet, wonderful person that just went to work and cared for his family.
He's just such a gentle man and such a caring man, and I can't believe that he had to die that way. It's so unfair.
He always wanted to make people laugh, so he was always making cracking jokes. They were really cheesy, but everyone laughed. He was just very well liked.
Mariana was just a teenager when her father was killed.
That's just the kind of guy he was. He cared about everyone, literally would take the shirt off his back to give it to you.
Mariana's parents had immigrated to Canada from Macedonia. He'd come to Toronto with nothing.
He felt so blessed and fortunate. Like, he came here to work hard and to make a good life for his wife and his children, and that's exactly what he did for us. And I know it was very hard. And then eventually he came across the TTC, and I think it was 27 years that he was there. He loved it.
He always had a smile on his face. When things were going bad for him, he kept everybody happy around him. So the truly valued employee of the TTC. There's going to be a lot of suffering because of this death. I was out with the family earlier this morning. And saw the suffering that they're going through. It's shocked all of us at the TTC.
Mariana remembers getting the news like it was yesterday.
My mom woke me up around 6. It was a school day. It was a Monday morning. And I thought it was a little bit early. I thought it was strange, like, why are my mom and brother standing there at the foot of my bed? And my mom's like, she started to say, Daddy's in the hospital, because she didn't know what to say to me. I was like, oh, he's in the hospital? Oh my God, okay, let me get dressed, let's go see him. And I hear my brother going, Mom, just tell her, Mom, just tell her. I'm like, tell me what? It's been a really long time since I thought about this. Just tell her. And she's like, Daddy's dead. Daddy died. What do you mean he died? I ran to the washroom and I threw up.
Jimmy wasn't supposed to be working that night. He was filling in for someone.
Wrong place, wrong time. My father is not the intended target. What makes you say why? Has to be pure evil.
That question of why was also bothering Dave Perry and his team.
And there's no audio, but you can see that Mr. Trajceski is trying to give him an indication that there's the vault, and he's also trying to give him an indication that he can't open the vault. He only has one key, that TTC security has to come along with a second key, and together they can open the vault. So what you have now is a very frustrated person. This is clearly a robbery. And just after a brief time in there, the suspect is seen running out of the booth. And if you're watching that video at that moment, you would think, thank God this is over, and thank God that Mr. Trajceski is going to be okay. And Mr. Trajceski comes walking out of the booth, and his hands are still bound behind his back. And he's clearly, you could see a little bit of relief on his face. But then just as quickly as you saw that relief, you saw this look of horror on his face when the suspect came back with that knife and began stabbing Mr. Trajceski. And you see the two of them fall off video. And that's where Mr. Trajceski was found. And what had happened is, as we did the timelines on this, is when the booth is first opened, there's a silent alarm that went off. And 30 seconds after the silent alarm, it goes audible. And that timing worked precisely with just as the suspect was leaving, that the alarm went audible. And it was our belief at the time that perhaps he thought that Mr. Trajceski had triggered an alarm and got angry and went back and did what he did. And it was a horribly violent murder with a man who had his hands behind his back tied and completely defenseless. First murder of a non-duty TTC employee. It became the next and the newest high-profile case in Toronto. And I think as the days and weeks unfolded, it started to perhaps overshadow the Audie investigation, which again was the previous high-profile case, and that's just the way it goes. And Chris Wilson and I were in charge of the case and started trying to put things together as quickly as we could.
It may have felt like investigators were being pulled in two separate directions, but it was only a matter of time before the evidence brought them back together.
Male unknown, unknown complexion, his age is unknown. He's approximately 5'7", slim build. He was last seen wearing a black-colored hooded sweatshirt, dark pants, light-colored gloves, and carrying a brown or dark-colored shoulder bag.
As he left, the suspect left the subway system out through the bus bays. There was a bus driver pulling in for his last run of the night, and he heard the alarm going off, and he was able to give us an immediate description of the suspect. And what this bus driver was able to tell us that was extremely helpful was the direction of travel. The suspect ran out of there and turned left, which is north, and ran full speed, and the bus driver said he's done this before. He never even missed a stride. He jumped onto this wooden hydro box at full flight and over an 8-foot fence, and then took off eastbound along the tracks. The way he described this to us was that they see this from time to time with people that live in the neighborhood. That they trespass, they jump this fence, and they run along, and they'll either turn to the south and go into the neighborhoods, or more importantly, cross the tracks and go north into a whole collection of apartments. The second very important piece of information was that 2 members of the sexual assault squad showed up on scene, and they came over to Chris and I, and they described the fact that they were looking for a male suspect who happened to match the description of our suspect, who was wanted for 2 sexual assaults.
So this one investigation is growing. At what point do we start to look at this suspect related to the Ottey sisters' murder?
It was quite a while before we linked the 2 cases together, so if you can imagine, there was so much still going on the Audie case that was completely separate. Even from a behavioral component, there was no reason for anybody, including us, to believe that these 2 cases in any way were linked.
Avis Audie, still raw with grief from the loss of her daughters Marsha and Tammy, was also caught off guard.
I can remember vividly when Mark Mendelsohn called me and told me that they had a DNA match for my case. And then shortly after finding out that the reason they got this match, or they were able to find out this person, they were comparing DNAs, and they realized it's the same person responsible for Mr. Trajceski. Marsha had his DNA under her fingernails.
Coming up after the break, how police got their match and the international manhunt that ensues. Police had suspected Marsha Audie's ex-boyfriend, Rohan Ranger, of murdering her and her sister. Now they have a DNA match with another case, the murder of a Toronto transit worker. And police are about to name a new suspect. Now back to Caryn Lieberman with If Anything Happens to Me.
Do not approach this man. Consider him armed and dangerous, and please use a telephone and call us right away.
We were very shocked to learn that the man who killed the Audie sisters is the same man who killed my father. Marsha Audie was a classmate of mine. We attended the same school.
And that's when we met Avis. Like they had told me just before I met her, I was like, oh my God. I just, like my heart went out to her. But we had this connection. There was this person who had done this to our loved ones. And it was a very strong connection.
So the ride that we had on that forensic trip in my entire career is the most exciting and the most complicated forensic piece of evidence I've ever collected in my entire career. And it came out of 40 Teesdale Place.
Hello. Hi, where are you living?
Teesdale Place, one of the apartments close to Victoria Park Station, in the direction the bus driver says he saw the suspect running.
We had over 10,000 tons of compacted garbage, and we put a search team in there, and we gave them pictures off of the video of the suspect's clothing, and we said, let's have a look.
What did you see 7?
5.5 hours into looking, they got their break.
There it was, on a big sheet of forensic paper laid out of these black pants that we saw in the video. And they've got mud and indications that somebody was running and tripping and sliding. And the black shoes, black socks, and most importantly, that black sweat top. It was all there.
First, they did a fiber profile on the clothing items.
Even the ligatures that were used in the sexual assaults, we found fibers from those ligatures that matched fibers in the hood of that sweat top.
They started running a DNA profile on the sweatshirt.
There was microscopic blood on that sweat top that matched Mr. Trajceski. So now we're excited. Now we know that we're holding on to the clothes of the killer.
They also ran the DNA for the 2 sexual assaults.
Bang, bang, we got 2 hits, and it was absolutely matched.
But there was one more connection to be made, and it almost happened by accident when Dave ran into an investigator working the Audie case.
I asked him how his case was going, and he told me. And he asked me how my case was going, and I told him. And then I said to him, what does Rohan Ranger look like? What's his description? And he said, well, he's male black. He's from Jamaica. He's about 5'7", 5'8", 145 to 150 pounds with a shaved head and a goatee. He says, what does your unknown suspect look like? And I said, that. And we actually stood there looking at each other for a second, and we both went, no. These cases aren't linked. And I'd asked Ron at that point, I said, do you guys have DNA? And he said, we just got a DNA profile from under one of the girl's fingernails. So we have all of these crimes come crashing together from one sweat top.
When it came to who murdered the Audie sisters, police realized they could now be certain that they were searching for 2 men, that Rohan Ranger had not acted alone. The mysterious man in the hoodie had been there too.
And now we have to figure out who is that and how is he related in any way to Rohan Ranger? Is he a friend, a colleague, contracted murder, whatever? We just didn't know.
20-year-old Kincaid is wanted for 3 murders and 2 rapes. He is very bright, has a high IQ, and may even be taunting police.
Adrian Kincaid was identified as the man in the hoodie, the man captured on the TTC surveillance video, the man depicted in the composite sketch created by his rape victims.
He'd been violent with his intimate partners before that too. And actually it was one of his intimate partners that gave us the DNA sample that confirmed that Adrian Kincaid was the person that all of this evidence was going to tie to, because you have to remember, you have to have your suspect sample.
And Adrian Kincaid had known Marsha Ottey.
Police said Kincaid knew the sisters because he briefly attended their Scarborough High School. One of his cousins was also a student there and dated Marsha Ottey for several years.
Kincaid's cousin was Rohan Ranger, Marsha's ex-boyfriend. The manhunt took investigators south to Miami.
Detective Frank Alfonso told us if this fugitive was here in Miami, that they would find him. So yesterday when we came here, he said he was here and we found him. He kept his word.
Great people, excellent investigators. We were happy to, to assist them and help them in every way we could.
Adrian Kincaid was arrested this evening in North Miami, Florida at approximately 6:45 p.m.
Detectives believe Kincaid may have been in Miami since November. Police from Toronto, Miami, and the FBI picked up Canada's most wanted man without incident on an apartment balcony near where he was staying.
I was probably one of the most exhilarating moments of my entire career. I grabbed my cell phone and I called Marsha Trajceski. And all I could say to her is, Marianne, we got him.
It's clear so we can get out.
Move it back, move it back. Move it back!
Mr. Kincaid, do you have anything to say?
Adrian, excuse me.
For what?
Okay, Adrian.
Adrian, what do you got to say?
Adrian Kincaid had a red sweatshirt on. He was cuffed, and Dave and Chris were escorting him out of the airport, I think. I have that picture in my mind, and that picture is never going to leave my mind.
We feel comforted to know that he's in custody now and that the people of Scarborough can relax. We know that they were really scared.
Mind yourself, the door's closing now.
Kincaid admitted to murdering Mariana's father, Dimitrija Trajceski, and playing a role in the killing of Marsha and Tammy Ottey.
We'd arranged for some officers from Peel Region to pick up Kincaid's father, who I'd met and talked to. A very nice man, but convinced that we were framing his son and that his son wasn't capable of these crimes. And he asked Chris and I if he could speak to his son, and we said, yeah, of course. So we allowed him into the interview room with his pastor to speak to his son. They were in there for about, 10 or 15 minutes tops. And he came out, and he looked at me and he said, he did it. And I said, yes, sir, I know he did it. He goes, no, he killed those two girls. And he killed that TTC collector. I'm assuming he told you. And he says, yeah, he told me everything. And he reached into his pocket, and he actually had a micro cassette recorder. And he said, I have it on tape.
He recorded his son.
He recorded his son. So I said to him, what are you going to do with that tape? And he just looked at me and handed it over to me.
Soon after Kincaid's arrest, his cousin Ranger turned up in Jamaica.
Rowan!
Ranger was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder in the stabbing deaths of Marsha and Tammy Ottey.
When the charges were laid, do you feel anything at that point?
Oh my God, it was, maybe I can sleep tonight. Because although I had armed my house, I had trouble sleeping. For a long time, I had trouble sleeping. Trauma like that disturbs your sleep, disturbs your state of mind. I was always looking over my shoulders.
It was such a relief. I immediately thought about Audie and her daughters. It was a relief for her, it was a relief for us.
Kincaid also pleaded guilty to several charges related to 2 sexual assaults. And he had a message for his victims, saying, I'm sorry. Sorry is a gross understatement. Trajceski's family won't be able to hug him again. I'm guilty. Let justice be served. Audie would have to wait until the following year for her turn in court to find out what happened to her daughters.
Coming up, Audie faces her daughter's alleged killers in court. Tonight on Crime Beat, the Trajceski family can take comfort in the fact that their father's killer, Adrian Kincaid, has been found guilty. But the Ottey family is still preparing to relive their horror. Adrian Kincaid and his cousin, Rohan Ranger, will now each go to trial for the murders of sisters Marsha and Tamara. We now return to Crime Beat's Caryn Lieberman with the conclusion of If Anything Happens to Me.
It was such a long, drawn-out process, dear God.
Rohan Ranger's trial was first, followed by his cousins, Adrian Kincaid. Looking at Ranger in the courtroom, Avis no longer recognized the young man she used to drive home after dinner.
And then I had to take the stand. You know, jury's so close to you, they're looking right at you. The accused are right there looking at you. And for most of the trial, they giggled.
During Rohan Ranger's trial, his cousin Adrian Kincaid testified. He described his version of what happened that fateful night in August, when Marsha and her younger sister Tammy were brutally stabbed to death.
He talked about how Rohan had grabbed Tamara and walked her back to the house on sort of, I think what they were trying to do is make it look like it was a boyfriend-girlfriend situation. And when obviously she thought her sister maybe forgot something or whatever, she opened the door. And of course that led to the murder of both of them, whereby they were both taken control of, they were taken downstairs. Rohan Ranger murdered Marsha, and while he was attacking Marsha, Tamara tried to flee, and Adrian Kincaid grabbed her, and the two of them murdered her at the same time. And that's what netted the DNA profile. The DNA profile that we got that matched all of our crime scenes came from Tamara's fingernail.
She was trying to defend herself.
She was trying to defend herself and defend her sister.
Their bodies were pure, and that's how they were. They didn't smoke, and, you know, they were so decent. And to think that some thug, you know, from wherever he came from, scum of the earth, both of them, you know, they had to just rob us of these.
During the trial, Rohan Ranger never accepted responsibility. He blamed the murders on his cousin, saying that Kincaid had wanted to kill Tammy and that Marsha simply got in the way. But the jury didn't believe him.
Ranger remained stone-faced as the verdict was read. Guilty of first-degree murder in the death of 19-year-old Marsha Audie. Guilty of manslaughter in the death of 16-year-old Tamara.
I remember when he was sentenced, he just glared at me. And this look as, you know...
If he couldn't have Marsha, nobody could have her.
Yes, and his words were, if I can't have you, no one else will.
Rohan Ranger was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years for the murders of Marsha and Tamara Ottey. Kincaid was convicted of first-degree murder for the two sisters and sentenced to life in prison, the same sentence he received in a previous trial for the murder of Toronto transit ticket collector Dimitrija Trajceski. But the legal saga wasn't over for Avis. Both men appealed their convictions. Kincaid's appeal was rejected, but in 2003, the Ontario Court of Appeal granted Ranger a new trial based on a series of errors made by the trial judge.
Trying to cope and just find it, you know, very painful. It's just being in court again. It seems like it was just yesterday.
The jury came back again with a guilty verdict. A few years later, Ranger tried again, appealing his murder and manslaughter convictions. He was rejected the following year in 2012.
And I've had enough. I've really had enough. And if there's another trial, they'll have to arrest me. I won't be testifying again.
All those years back and forth to court, he is appealing what? I am so, just leave me alone.
Along with his cousin, Ranger will be eligible for parole in 2021.
So who are you now compared to who you were when the girls were killed?
I'm bold. Bold. He's off. I've set him free in my mind.
How does forgiveness play a role in that? Is there forgiveness?
It's painful because what people do not realize, with 25 years of them in jail, I was also shackled. I was also in jail. I carried the burden.
One way Avis has found peace is by helping others.
And I'm sure there was some heavy PTSD having to deal with these cases. and deal with people like myself who totally was broken and hurting and crying, and I said, how can I help?
Avis started volunteering and then working for the Toronto Police Service. She's most proud of her time with the Employee and Family Assistance Program. Avis also wrote a book about coping with grief.
Sometimes it's maybe to help with laundry, cook a meal, listen to you, walk with you, walk your dog. So those were those things I captured in the book that, don't tell a person, stop crying.
Just be there.
Yeah.
You know what, it's a crime that impacted so many people, right? I mean, you have these beautiful girls just starting their lives, right? One with an amazing opportunity on a scholarship down to the US. Beautiful parents, lovely family.
You create bonds with people.
You do. I bumped into Mariana many years later walking downtown Toronto. And she came up to me and she said, do you remember when you came to our house and told us that you had arrested this guy? And I said, yes. And she said, I told you were coming to my wedding. I said, yeah, that was 17 years ago. She goes, well, I'm getting married next June. So my entire family was invited to the wedding. And, of course, the most emotional time during the wedding is when she had to talk about her father.
The police work, they're my heroes. Dave is like an uncle to me. He's like a second dad almost.
To feel close to her father, Mariana goes to Chester Station, the station he usually worked at, the one where he knew all the regulars by name.
I have a son now, he's 4.5, and we've named him James, and his Greek Macedonian name is Dimitri, and yeah, that was after my dad. But his grandfather's not here. He's not here to see him, his namesake. He used to say to me, when you have a kid, he always knew I was gonna have a son. He's like, when you have a son, I'm gonna take him to Maple Leaf games. I was like, yes, Dad, I want you to take him to Toronto Maple Leaf games. His favorite thing to do was to watch the games on the television, but he used to love to just walk down to College Station, and we would buy tickets from scalpers because that's the only way he could get tickets, and everyone would laugh at him. Oh, why do you want to go see the Maple Laughs? Ha ha ha, because they were so bad. But he was a diehard fan, so he would take me to the games, and that's my best memory. Absolutely, I would love going to games with him. He should have been there for all that stuff. It's really, really unfair. It's something that we to this day think about every single day, in some form or another.
Time moves on, but the loss remains. For Mariana, without a father. For Avis, without her daughters. Their lives deeply impacted by the violent actions of two men.
I wrote on my Facebook page yesterday about Tammy. Tammy had a flag football game. I think it was a final game. And I worked near to where she was playing. And I went to my boss and I asked for time off, and I went to surprise her because I love sports. She was only about 14, 15 then. And Tammy saw me from the opposite side of the field. And Tammy, maybe with a wiggle, "Hey, Grandma, who invited you?" And it was only yesterday, profoundly as it is, I said, "Tammy, you called me Grandma. I'll never be a grandma."
These families will be forever linked by the horrific and senseless murders of their loved ones. But they were able to find strength from each other, then and now. Their memories now shared and ready to be passed on to future generations. I'm Anthony Robart. Thank you for joining us tonight on Crime Beat.
For more on this story and other high-profile Canadian cases, check out Crime Beat Podcast. You can listen for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or on CuriousCast.ca.